Welcome to the Manders Mindset podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
A little bit of mystery behind the breathing goddess. She's like, ooh, there's an awakening. There's a new door and I was going to open tonight. And there is a new door. It's a mindset ball. Yes. Welcome to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I'm here today with Heather Ann Ferri. And she is a trauma-informed healer and spiritual educator whose life journey has taken her from Broadway stages and Guinness World Records to profound dark nights of the soul. Having transformed her own experiences of loss and physical immobility into rites of passage, she now guides others in reclaiming sovereignty, awakening spiritual intelligence, and embodying resilience. I am so excited to talk to the breathing goddess. Thank you, Heather. So who would you say Heather is at the core? Ooh, you're going right into it, aren't you? You're not playing around. She's like, let's just go right into it. Who am I at the core? Honestly, at the very core, I'm an innocent, pure, playful child of goddess. I love that. Thank you. Now, can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us about your upbringing, childhood, family dynamic, however deep you want to take that. Absolutely. Well, it starts out a little bit of the opposite. I mean, I come into this world very quiet. But sometimes when children don't use their vocal skills right away, it doesn't mean that they're not aware of everything that's going around them. So we all find we come into this Mother Earth with either past life or instinctual gifts. And for me, it was really the magical tap shoes that my parents bought me at age 3. That was my first voice. It was very easy. I was very good at it. And it was going to be a very useful tool because by the time I reached 7 years old, there was a lot of trauma in my household. My parents married young. They were high school sweethearts. They both came from a lot of generational traumas. And back in the 70s, there wasn't, a lot of therapies. And, my father lost his job with the family business, which caused a lot of stress. He was very confused, very much wounded inside from childhood traumas and bloodline traumas. And then when I was 8 years old, my mother switched mental states. And in the mornings when nobody was home, she would come into my bedroom while I was getting ready for school. That pure-hearted child, right? That wants to play and is excited to go see her friends. And my mom's trying to kill me. She's basically attacking me, almost choking me to death and screaming horrific things to me. And this became a pattern in my life when I was in my 8 to about 9 years old. And for those who are listening, it's not an easy thing to talk about. I had to do a lot of my healing journey so that my nervous system could handle talking about it. So there's, I think, a time and a place to either write your story, talk about it. And we really need to be kind and not push people into talking about things they're not ready to do. I now can see how mystical and magical I was. I wanted to keep my family together, so I put on a lot of shows. I was very good in the theater arts and dance, and my mom wanted me to be the star so she could get lots of attention. So there was a little bit of like, I'll win awards and maybe she'll love me type thing. I would say one of my saving graces growing up was my brother. He was 3 years older. And, we are very different at this moment in time, but I think our roots were we played outside all day long in the forest.
running, biking, sports. My brother was my best friend, and he wasn't there during the abuse, but I, in my interpretation, feel he was abused as well by my mom, but he doesn't remember some of that stuff. So I try to be graceful about that subject matter. But yeah, I would say he was the angel for me personally in the household at the time.
How were your preteen years and early teenage years?
Awkward. They were very awkward. It's been interesting when I moved back to Pittsburgh in my late 30s, and now I'm in my 50s and talking to people I went to high school with just to see what their perception of me was. Because when you have as much brain damage, you really don't know who you are. You're just surviving. But for me, I was sick all the time and covering it up. I had a lot of sinus infections, throat infections. And I really had a lot of distrust with the medical system because I was over medicated. And there were pictures that I found later on in my healing journey that I looked like I had a massive stroke. And I think to myself, how did nobody see this? You know, in a medical field, those questions come up. So I was sick all the time. Inside, I was really insecure. Dating was really not an option. I didn't feel that I was worthy to sort of have a boyfriend, and the idea of bringing them home was like, "No, you're not gonna do that. What's my mom gonna do?" So that I kinda kept that off the table and just focused on becoming the best in the theater arts, and I was driven to have a showbiz career so I could get out of Pittsburgh, I could get out of my house, right? So I didn't have, people date and then they go to homecoming. I didn't do that stuff. My brother did. But I really didn't because I was too broken inside. I put on a lot of shows, I won a lot of awards. People thought I was really when I spoke to the kids I grew up with, they thought I had the perfect life. They said, "You should get an award for acting because we thought you had the perfect household." They just really confirmed that I was a very nice and sweet soul, and I am a nice and sweet soul. But as you know, the world can be pretty harsh to nice and sweet souls.
And now you mentioned you were really sick during your teenage years or your preteen years. About how old were you when that started?
I would say so, the abuse stopped by around nine-ish, beginning of that age. So I'd say by 10, I couldn't move my neck for 2 weeks. So I'd be frozen in my neck area. So I couldn't turn my head. Even though I could dance, I couldn't turn my head. I didn't speak in my household, barely at all growing up. So coming on the podcast, becoming a professional speaker, singing is the healing of me and the women in my bloodline. I had sores a lot in my throat and inside my mouth that were very painful. So I was always internally in a lot of pain, but nobody knew it.
And how long did this pain last before you told someone?
Well, back then, I didn't tell anyone because of, when you're almost murdered by your mom and you're told that she's screaming that she should have never had you and that you're the fault of all the problems in the household, you're a child that's going to program that into you. So all my job is I need to become somebody else that she'll love. I need to become somebody else that this family can fit and work together. You get the idea?
I do.
Yeah.
Now, did this loop ever end for you?
Well, I would say it settled down once I moved to New York City because there was a little bit of adjustment of being away from the family. I never thought I would go back home. I thought once I left, that's it. I was actually running away in my intention mindset. It really wasn't concerned about show business. I was just concerned about leaving my predator. But I did well in show business. I was extremely talented and skillful and disciplined. I was lucky to have a skill set as a dancer, actress, and semi singer, but that wasn't my forte at that point. I was resilient. So I would audition, 10 times a week. And, you audition 25 times before you get a job offer. So you have to be resilient. I worked many jobs. I had some magical experiences and my health was decent. I had some near-death experiences there. I don't think I ever had good health, to be honest with you. I just endured it. I had to endure the fact that my internal system was struggling. And I didn't really get it better until the last 11 years of becoming a trauma, I call expert coach, which I never planned on doing. But that was sort of what the mother, the divine mother who owns this earth, positioned me to do, both for myself and also at the place I'm going now in my career, to be somebody to implement changes because we're in a mental health crisis in the United States. And we need somebody that has actually walked the walk instead of just talking the talk.
I agree with you there. Now, about how old were you when you left home and went to New York?
So I went to Point Park University. I got a partial dance scholarship. And then I worked as a performer. Back in the 80s and 90s in Pittsburgh, there was a lot of theater, a lot of union theater. So I got a lot of experience before I went to New York. I got a degree in dance. I was studying musical theater. I was studying acting at Carnegie Mellon. And then I moved to New York City. I guess I was 23 and a half, because I actually graduated early at Point Park University because I was just driven, man. It was just all achievements. I would say back then I had a great boyfriend that incorporated a social life for me. He also expanded art, psychology, and he introduced therapy ideas to me. He didn't know my story because I didn't share it, but he must have picked up on some things because we were dating.
So you leave home around 23, and how was New York?
I loved New York. Back then, it was quite different. It was still a little dangerous. It was still cleaning up from the drugs and the prostitutes on 42nd Street. So, I still had my guard up at times, but I loved New York City. I loved the people. I loved the diversity, the conversations, the fact that everybody's kind of engaged in growing entrepreneurship. I love those concepts. And back when I was there, one of the most, I would say, healthy environments was the jazz and tap dancing clubs that I say I kind of fell into, but I think I was destined because I lived in an apartment above a jazz club. And that's how I met the tap legend, Jimmy Slide, who eventually pulled me on stage and activated my soul database with my bloodline and actually started my career in tap dancing, choreographing, eventually becoming a teacher, master tap teacher. And that gave me a lot of confidence. It was a weird time in the 90s because that field was very masculine and it was very Black male masculine, but it was very masculine. I was more of a masculine energy at that point, trying to prove myself, trying to make it. I had a lot of walls up. But I would say with the tap masters, I would say in show business in general, there was a lot of shadiness. There was a lot of, you got to make sure you're not going to sell your soul, But I would say with the tap masters, that was far from, they were so spiritual, godly men. I'm not saying they were perfect, but they were godly men off stage as well as on stage. And there was a lot of kind of, without calling it counseling, kind of counseling, because there was an engagement of deep questions. You go to a party in show business and everybody's like, so what show are you doing? Did you meet so-and-so yet? Oh, I can fix you up with so-and-so. It says that sort of condescending-ish, like, let's who do you know, who I know, I'm better than you. None of that with the tap masters, Gregory Hines, Jimmy Slide, Henry, none of that. None of that at all. They were like, how did you learn to turn like that? Where'd that come from? You know, I love the way you did that phrase on stage. It really stimulated, like they were deep, soulful, psychological men that wanted to engage artists. And they really embraced all artists. And it was quite yin and yang.
And about how long were you in New York for?
I was there for a solid decade, and I ended my last show was a one-woman show off of Times Square. And believe it or not, it was a theater in a window that projected out to the streets. And I would tap dance for 15 minutes during the show for a couple time periods. And it was really cool. And then my poetry was hanging. So people would walk by and read my poetry. And it was the perfect ending of the chapter because I was getting fed up with musicals. I didn't like the characters that I didn't relate to the musicals that people wanted to cast me in, to be honest with you. It just started to become soulless. And so I started to do writing and started writing shows for women in particular in the East Village and doing my own shows. And that was really engaging to me. We're talking about eating disorders. We're talking about sexual assault. We're talking about things that we're not allowed to talk about on stage because we're just supposed to be like this. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, well, I am happy now, but there's a lot underneath me.
I gotcha. And now you're in New York for a decade, and post being in New York, where do you go from there?
I went back home to Pittsburgh. I was studying meditation for a couple years in New York. I was known sort of also as a Pilates master teacher, yogi, and I really wanted to come home and face the family and heal. So that was the intention. That was the mindset. I left Pittsburgh going, I'm never going to come back. I'm escaping the predator. And the mindset, I've never said this before, but I'm channeling your energy. The mindset sent me back to say, no, I can't keep running in circles. My love relationships are not working out because I have childhood trauma. My career, I do not want to become famous and be masked up and have a bunch of people using my talents and thinking they're my friends when they're not my friends. Like there was something underneath that knew if I keep going down this road, I may end up not happy. So I'm going to go back. And it was not an easy decision. I'll say this to people who want to heal, because when I went back home and I started teaching Pilates and yoga in Pittsburgh, back then those words were not popular. Nobody showed up for my classes. In New York City in Times Square, I had a waiting list for my classes. So you could imagine the confidence I have. Like people literally are calling at 6 a.m. to get in my class, and there's a waiting list for my classes. I go back to Pittsburgh. Nobody cares. And nobody wants to study this stuff. So talk about an ego trip. Talk about losing your ego and, whoa, what am I going to do here?
I'd love to transition back a tad. How did you get into meditation and Pilates and studying all of this?
That's a great question. You must have just read my mind. No, I'm serious. Because when I was in New York City and visiting home, my father hurt his shoulder and he was going to a physical therapist. This is back in the late 90s, early 2000, maybe after 2000. It's back then. And his physical therapist was studying Kundalini yoga. Nobody heard those words in my city. It wasn't existent. And he wanted to work with my dad privately on his diabetes. So he used my dad as a guinea pig for 6 months. And my dad didn't tell anybody because he came from blue collar construction and all that. But when I went home to visit, he pulled me in the office. And I thought he was going to tell me some sort of family feud. And he sat and taught me my first meditation, which I talk about in my keynotes, and breath work. And that leads me into not just medical meditations, but eventually I discovered the brain protocols, which are really the game changer in how I rewired my brain. So my father, who always abandoned me and was wounded, ended up giving me the tool, the biggest tool. Well, two of them, water too, because my dad complained he saw the water pipes growing up in construction, and he would talk about it in the kitchen with my mom. Nobody really took my dad's voice seriously, but he was like, there's chemicals in these pipes. And he didn't quite put it all together with his dyslexia and his traumas. But I'm on a water mission here in the United States, on a deeper one, not just the one of how do you clean water, but what happened to the healing waters. So it started with my dad.
That's so fascinating that the therapist wanted to work with him.
Well, my dad was a very interesting energy, to be honest with you, and a character. He had a lot of light. And really, I really feel in some ways he was my mom's healer by staying by her side, even though she was unstable emotionally and mentally. I think in my interpretation, I can only speak, I think he was abused a lot by her in that sense. But I also think, I know her bloodline now. We come from a lot of slavery and abuse. So that's the programming of the predator instead of the slave in her brain. He could walk in a room and people just kind of were like, they just kind of want to talk to him. You know what I mean? He was a great dancer socially. So people loved watching him dance. They were like, he could make my mom look great on the dance floor. So he had this thing, but it was never developed. He had never had the confidence or the right people to position him. I really do feel he always felt less than. Even though at his funeral, they were lined up. People, blue collar people, it was huge. People were lined up. And the thing I heard the most, and it was a little painful to hear this because you got to say, he wasn't in my life. He didn't show up for me a lot. So it was very painful to hear this. But at the same time, everybody was saying, oh, wow, when your dad walked in the room and he smiled, that just life got better for them. And that's just energy healing. That's just a gift. So it doesn't surprise me that this therapist was and I will say that picture of him at that age I'm using for my book 1. It's that year that he studied Kundalini yoga. He looked the best in his life. And I think he stopped doing the practice, but my mom wasn't doing it with him. And he used that as an excuse. We blame our partners and we don't keep self-growing and self-healing.
So now he introduces you to this meditation, and after it, what do you do from there?
That's a great question. So I had actually been looking in New York City for a yoga class. I was going to these yoga classes where everybody was stretching. You're in downward dog for long periods of time. And I kind of thought to myself, I studied dance, Pilates, Alexander technique. I know physical body, but I thought yoga was mind, body, soul. And I would also feel an energy outside of the classrooms. This is my interpretation of a little bit. And this was back when yoga was just starting to happen too. I think it's changed a lot over 20 years. But back then there was a little bit of I am a yogi. And I have my yoga mat. It is blue with flowers on it. And I'm really down to earth girl, play in the forest. I'm talented, but I'm not egotistic. So that's right. So I was a little I don't know if I fit in with this thing. So I was turned off. But when my dad taught me this meditation and I could feel something happening in my brain, I went back and Googled Kundalini, and there was a center right around the corner from New York University. And I was teaching at New York University at the time in the theater arts. So it was very easy to get to that. And I was cautious even in the Kundalini yoga classes because everyone wears white and I didn't want to be a part of a cult. I had already grown up with a dictator. I was like, I'm an independent thinker. Please, but it was the meditations and breath work that I was observing observations, and I became my own scientist with it. I mean, I was thinking about this today. In all the things that I've taught, I've always been outside the box in how I teach it. Always. Even with tap dance, when I was teaching workshops around the country and even outside of the country, I wouldn't just teach steps and combinations. I would then break it down of teaching people, how do you find your voice? What do you want to say with it? So that they wouldn't have to think shuffle ball change, but they would think the words that they would want to say to somebody that they couldn't say. So they'll say it through their feet. So it became tap therapy. It became tap, I'm finding your soul. It was the same thing in Pilates and yoga. I didn't sit in front of a classroom doing the class with them. I sat and then I walked around and instructed and observed what was going on with people to explain you're not breathing properly. What good is coming to yoga class every week if you're not breathing properly? Let's figure this out. Inhale, the belly expands. And so I found that there were people actually engaging in teaching, because teaching isn't just sitting in front and doing the class with somebody. And why I went into private coaching is after a while, my yoga classes in Pittsburgh grew. I was getting a headache because I was like, oh my God, that person's pelvic alignment is completely off. And oh my God, that person has a lot of blockage in their throat. And they had so much instructions that needed. I thought, am I serving them in this classroom? Am I actually giving them stuff? Because I know if you repeat things and doing them incorrectly, you're causing blocks. And my fear right now is the quick fix to watching classes on YouTube, which there's pros and cons to that, and not understanding how to actually be a student in the classroom. Do you get that? Like, that's a difference. And when you have that, then you are empowered because that toolkit lives on with you. So I've had yoga teachers, 15, 25 years, teaching yoga, come to me, and they're actually breathing incorrectly. You say, how could that be? Because they're focused all day on everybody else. They're taking in trauma energy from their classrooms. Oh, they come from childhood trauma and they don't know now their breath is reversed. They don't remember. And also a lot of these trainings don't teach how to heal self first before teaching others. So I think there needs to be a regrouping of how we teach or how we align healers in a new system in the United States moving forward. I hope to be a part of that. But I don't think that's a quick fix, So I love ancient sciences. I don't like the quick fix of how they're being presented online. And I don't like the quick fix of how we might not be teaching teachers how to help people become their own teachers, scientists, and healers.
I get what you're saying. What do you think is the suggestion or the fix for that?
I think the fix for that, and that's the transition I'm going into, is to either formulate a business team of 2 or 3 business partners financially and get a nonprofit or an organization and just start talking about how we implement, because I worked to heal all the traumas that I had. And I had not just that childhood abuse, which was severe, but then I had bloodline trauma. Some of them I documented in my YouTube videos recently, a lot of rashes and burns. So there's about 8 to 10 sciences I've mastered. And I've taken them to levels that aren't documented. And so it's a question of sitting with business, highly unconscious business, financial people to figure out trainings and how to figure out, do we work with these 3 first? Do we work with these 4? How do we incorporate them in? Because I can go into, especially in Pittsburgh, 14 healing centers closed down. I could talk about why that, it wasn't because of the managers, it was because of the greedy landlords that after 2 years of making then profit, the landlords would triple the rent. I know that for a fact. So it wasn't that they didn't have business skills. It was the landlords were greedy. So there's a lot of things like, so, and then I can talk about, you go into a healing center. I'm not going to label just to be politically kind of protect myself, but, and I can walk in and say, okay, you have this healing module going on. That's great. And then you have these 3 things that poison the people coming in. How does that add up? That's where we're really off right now, because the men in charge, the men who have power in the United States, who are franchising a lot of businesses in the United States, don't have the mastering, healing, and information that I have. They're coming more from a profit point of view, not a point of view of like, oh, I have this one thing and it's great because so-and-so on a podcast said it was great. But, oh, I have poisoning water that the people are drinking with forever chemicals in it. So it's counteracting and making them dehydrated. Do you get what I'm saying? So we're having things, and that's what I see myself moving forward in. I think I'm one of the only people that has this really diverse, not only in how I healed, but background in how the Mother Earth puts me in all these different positions of teaching to understand what's not working. Because this is what we can say. We can say we're failing in mental health right now. We can say the rehabs are failing in the United States. And that's not an insult to therapists, or it's not an insult, but we can say by the stats and sickness, increase in Alzheimer's, cancers, that what we've been doing is not the answer. And we need something drastically different. And that's where I come in.
Now, you mentioned 3 things that poison people. Is 3 just an example, or are you referring to like 3?
It's an example. There can be many things that are poisoning people in a facility that people aren't thinking about. I'll give you an example of a gym. You go into a gym to work out, and you know right away when you're working out, you're going to be building lactic acid. How do we release lactic acid? Well, many people say drink water. So what are people doing at gyms? Do they go to the water fountain that has no filter? Or do they go to the plastic water bottles that we know are not the answer? Right? Or do they go into the gym showers that don't have a proper filter? And I'm not saying get a filter. I'm getting the proper certified filter, which is a different conversation of education. And I have a free ebook to introduce that, because I've spent 14 years studying water filters. I work with water filter, and I work with a Japanese medical device, which was a game changer, medical grade water, PubMed research, right? So I worked with 4 different types of medical grade waters to heal the rashes and the inflammation that came out from my generational bloodline traumas. And that's documented in the water dance video that I recently posted a few months ago. It was pretty severe. And I healed quickly because I'm an expert now. Most people, that wouldn't be the case. So if you're showering under chlorine, you're filtering into the pituitary and pineal, which we talk about in the spiritual or mindset world. But not all shower filters are or have certification. So how do you know if I've talked to so many plumbers here. I've talked to, because I come from construction. I know how to talk to, they know nothing about, like they know certain certifications, but then there's a lot they don't know that they're not getting education on. And doctors don't know anything about certifications and filtration. In fact, our hospitals have all plastic containers in them, which is poison. So you have to question who's funding these hospitals. What corporations are funding are apparently the places we go to when we're sick. So it's all of this breakdown that I understand because I've had to do so much work to get better and to get healthy and to anti-age. And the first 7 years of this with working with clients, I did things that I still love. I mean, I love acupuncture, but I would not recommend it in a trauma center. We have to be cost effective. We have to be time effective. If I can heal somebody with my stuff in a year, I spent 11 years. So you make a lot of mistakes, right? And I was a full time, like I was on a mission. So when you're hiring an expert to come in, you're hiring somebody that's been through all the ropes. And there's not a lot of people that have done that. Oh, there's a lot of healers, but a lot of those healers have not healed their generational traumas in them. And it's not a judgment to them. But I really feel that if we're supposed to live here on Mother Earth should not have poison water. Mother Earth should not have poison soil. Mother Earth should not have all this plastic stuff. We can go back to glass and simple things. We don't have to have all this plastic everywhere in our houses. Mother Earth, once it's back to its original vibration of frequency, we live much, much longer without all these diseases that are man-made. Not by Mother Earth, but by disrespecting Mother Earth. And that's why, I'm just grateful for you and other women, even the breathing goddess. I love that title because the breath, I teach so much in breath with my books, The Psychology of Breath. Breath can give you so much information. It's the foundation of everything of shaking out trauma. But you think of goddess, I didn't even hear that word until my dad died. I didn't even know it existed. So it's interesting because we have to awaken. It's not just like a goddess title of, I'm a goddess, look at me. It's a respect for women. Mother Earth. When we start to see respect, we'll start to see the decrease in plastic consumption. We'll start to see the decrease in forever chemical poisons that are affecting 153 million people in the United States. So we can talk all day long, all this and that, but we have to see the practical results too. And I think that's also where I lie. I'm a mystic. You saw I was having a lot of fun with you beforehand, but I'm also about practicality. Let's look at the numbers and let's get real about it.
I get what you mean. Now, do you have a suggestion as to where people can start with respecting Mother Earth more? It's such a big topic, big idea. Where can people start with this?
That's a great question. So for me, I'm putting together a store because I feel like I'm writing an ebook on the process of psychology of healing my sugar addiction. So the ebook has like 80 questions that people can sit that I don't think their therapist or rehab will be asking them. But as they write, if things come out, they can go to their therapist and they can go to their coach. In that ebook, I bring up in one of the chapters water. And I give them practical things they can do every day to start to decrease plastic in their environment and to start researching. Now, obviously, I have a free ebook called Water Matters, and it's on my website, which is my name, Heather Ann Ferri. I made that ebook after many, many years, I have doctors on my team seeing blood work, research, understanding PubMed, understanding third-party certifications, and also understanding that a lot of websites know how to lie. They know how to phrase things to make you believe something, and they phrase it in a way that when you go to research, if they have that certification, they don't actually have that certification. And that's a shame. The consumer is already working too much and stressed out. So the ebook for consumers is to review and to ask questions to me and to upgrade your water systems. A lot of people do have water systems, and unfortunately, they're not doing what they need to do. Chemicals and arsenic, those have increased a lot in the last 5 years. So this is a new category that we haven't even really understood, but they're not easy to detox in the bodies, especially forever chemicals is like thousands of chemicals, but one of them is glyphosate. And glyphosate is the pesticides we put on our lawns because we want our lawns to be green and beautiful, but that's not good for the animals. It's not good for the soil. It's not good for our gardens, and it's not good for our water. And therefore, that's why you're seeing a lot of belly fat in Americans. The belly fat deals with the gut lining being destroyed, in my opinion, by glyphosate specifically. So when people review my ebook, they can message me. Or it also just tells you what you can do. And I give discounts for the clean water filtration, which is very cost effective. And that takes out forever chemicals. But then there's another lane with a medical device. But what people need to think about is also if I upgrade my water, which may mean you save money, like, so if you have a system that's not working that well, it's always depressing, right? Nobody wants to think, okay, the system I bought isn't doing what I want to do. I get it. That is a little challenging on the ego. It's a little challenging, but you have to think about what if I get a better system and this anti-ages me? I don't have to buy any of this stuff at the stores anymore. I start to have more energy. I start to be able to eliminate, toxins. But people who have no filtration system in America, you are the filter then. You're the filter of 80 plus contaminants in your water, forever chemicals, arsenic, which is over the line if you get testing, which costs in some states the equivalent of the filters I sell. So you can buy an $800 and test all your waters and see all the stuff, or you could just buy a filter. You know what I mean? Like it's that type of decisions. But I think we need to get rid of the plastic water bottles. They're everywhere. They're a virus. It's 53 billion, I think, in the country. Like it's out of control. And I'd like to see water fountains back in our playgrounds and schools where if we have to have a filter, we can have a cost-effective filter from the company I work for, which is one of the most cost-effective things. Like you're saving thousands and thousands of dollars each year. People have no idea at the cost that they're spending on these fancy bottled waters and the cost of their health. So, I mean, sometimes it's hard for people to understand the cost of their health. It's sad that Americans, we weren't trained to be preventive. But when I worked privately for 8 years in Alzheimer's and dementia, I did brain protocols in senior homes. You don't want that. You don't want either of that. And dementia, 10% risk higher for the microplastics now. So I can guarantee you, if you're drinking out of plastic containers, you're headed towards some of these diseases. I hope you don't get them, but statistically, if we're going to be practical and look at numbers, we're seeing an increase, especially in dementia with people who have plastic in their brains. So this is serious stuff. Water's serious. It's serious business. I'm very passionate about it because if you go on my channel, even if you get my ebook or go on my website, you're going to see pictures where I look a lot older. I look inflamed. That's showing you the transformation of what I'm talking about. So water was the first healing tool, and then the medical meditations and the brain work came in. So I think for the environment, saving money long term, get the ebook, ask questions. If you don't agree with something, bring facts to the table. That's all I ask.
That makes a lot of sense about reducing the plastic will help our bodies and the earth as a whole.
Yeah. And it's also, if you're a leader out there, or you're a business owner, or you're somebody that has some power, you are going to be a senior someday, or you may have a family member in a senior home. Consider, so the way I got the job doing brain work for seniors and Alzheimer's and dementia was because a private client who hired me for trauma was on the board of that senior home. So some of you out there have power and positioning to ask questions. You can have a consultation with me to ask questions first, download the ebook, read it first, do your homework on me, right? Before we do a consultation. But you have power to start at home. But we all want our seniors, as well as our children in schools, to be consuming something healthy, right? I just position that because people look at my resume, it's so diverse. It's because there were angels. You know, that mother who I was helping through trauma then used her power because she had it with her family system in that senior home, which helps seniors. We all can position in a little way. You may not have power, but you may know somebody that does. And maybe you get the water system and you start talking to them about it. Are you aware of this? We all have to start doing it. We can't just depend on a leader to fix everything. We can't depend on two people to fix everything. We all have something we can do, even if it's just setting a mindset, Manders Mindset, a positive intention. You may be sitting there like, I really get her. Read the ebook. Read it to your neighbor. Start talking about it. Start a meetup group. You have the ability. Everybody has a place in this to do something. And what it does is it starts to awaken a purpose because you're helping Mother Earth.
That makes so much sense. I like how you mentioned we can all do our part, whatever that looks like, even if it seems small. That's how things start before it gets to that next level. It starts with a person getting the system, then talking about it, even if they're not somebody with a podcast, even if they're not a creator, but the word of mouth is how it spreads. I'd love to transition a tad, but we've talked a little bit about mindset, and you mentioned about how it's not just about mindset to you and about how it's healing the mind itself. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So when I saw your podcast, I loved so much about you and your mission. And I was listening to some of it, though, I thought to myself, well, I'm going to be a little bit outside the box here. I'm like, here we go again. But mindfulness became very popular. And I went to a mindfulness convention in New York City this was before COVID. And I appreciate it, but it is definitely not what benefited me because I had brain damage and a lot of my clients have brain damage. So I work with stroke clients, but I also work with a lot of women who have amnesia and the wiring. If you're hit or sexually abused, you have dyslexia or ADHD, and there are not diagnoses. Like I wasn't diagnosed with these things, but I had them in my brain. I have to say damage because if you have a hammer and you hit a computer, do you think it's going to be damaged? It's going to be damaged, right? Which is my sort of, I'm kind of getting off a little bit of a tangent here, but I have a full thing about car accidents too. We're not handling that properly. People get hit by a car, they don't get the right brain work, they have brain damage, and then we wonder why 4 or 5 years later they're starting to have health issues, which I saw in clients. So for me, I did every positive affirmation you could possibly think about. I wrote them in a book every day. Like a lot of my clients who came to me every day. Louise Hayes, well, I love myself, blah, blah, blah. And nothing changed. Nothing changed. And it was because I had neurological PTSD, OCD brain damage. It wasn't until I was doing these higher intelligent brain protocols that do have PubMed research, doing finger positions, sound placements, breath patterns. So you're not just doing one thing, you're incorporating a multi-dimensional system here, that the trauma was releasing. My body would shake or I would feel pain. That's involuntary shaking. Animals do it naturally. Children do it naturally until we stop them. So it was the brain rewiring that started to shift my mind. So I have to have heal my mind to have a healing mind in essence, you know what I mean? So that my cellular, so everything believes it, because you can't fool your body. It knows it's damaged. And it's like saying, can we address this? And you may say, well, can I just kind of skip? I would say, I'm glad I didn't. It has made me highly intelligent, highly telepathic, psychologically advanced. All the things I'm bringing to the table next year haven't been done. And I'm convinced that many people have this, but we're being dumbed down so that certain elite people can control us all day long with their failed programs. That's my theory. When I go back to the children, I remember years ago walking on a street with all the restaurants, and people were outside eating at a table, and they had a dog sitting there. It was a pretty large dog. And a mother is walking up the street with her little boy, who's about 6 years old. And the dog jumps on the back of the little boy and attacks it. It doesn't bite the boy, but it's a large dog. It was quite scary. And it happened fast. Immediately, the boy was in shock, started crying, and he started to shake. And he was standing and shaking and crying, which is what you should do to release trauma. But guess what the woman with the dog and the mother were trying to do with the boy? They were trying to stop him. So we have missed trauma education in general. Children know what to do and animals know what to do. It's even when you're in a car accident. My clients who have gotten in a car accident years later, they've called me up. And I'm like, you don't need a session with me. Pull out the PTSD brain protocol, do it. They do it 80% better. Then if they need me to help them with the involuntary shaking, I can help them with that. Or if they already have that toolkit, they have that toolkit. We need to start teaching, like I said in the beginning, people to understand the toolkit and have it and understand how to use it when problems occur. We're not doing that. So that child, I was trying to control the environment, say, let the boy shake and cry. And they were uncomfortable with that. That's their issues. So we need trauma coaches trained a certain way, and they need to be paid well. It's a hard job. I was underpaid for many years because you're holding space for things that nobody else wants to hold space for. I think eventually family systems need to hold space for pain. And I have a lot to say about that as well. We've lost our ancestral tribal understandings of this. So I've had to do a lot of healing on my own, which has been terrifying at times, scary at times. I felt alone at times. I don't think we should continue a society that way.
I agree completely. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned about the little boy shaking and about them trying to stop him. You know, I think it was because they didn't understand. And I think so much of society doesn't. And anything people don't understand, they're usually not okay with, or they try to stop because they don't understand it. They don't get it.
Can I say something? So what you just mentioned is brilliant. They didn't understand it. And you're right, those women needed educated. What they don't understand is if they don't let the boy shake and cry, and he was doing exactly what he needed to do to release the terror because it was scary. I mean, that dog was bigger than him and it was jumped on his back. I mean, it's like, come on. Where does the trauma get stored then? Oh, it gets stored somewhere, whether it's in your liver, whether it's in the tissues on the side of your hip. And then the next trauma happens in school. Someone bullies you. And then you store it here. And then the next trauma happens in college. And then we wonder why we have such an extreme traumatized society. We don't even talk about bloodline trauma, which is scientific. And then we have an educational system and mental and healthcare that has very little trauma education. And then I say to myself, well, the people I am calling out, the leaders who have lots of money and come across on the platforms as if they care. I'm coming to them and saying, we've failed. Are you ready for a conversation? Are you ready to be the game changer? Because you cannot be proud of where we're at. For those who are listening, I'm being pretty fierce today because I've lived in a lot of repression too. This is my calling. And if you feel this, just send me positive energy. Because I'm going to need all the positive energy in the world to help change this. So your positive energy for me is a gift. And I will take that gift because I am passionate. I want our children and the children coming in to live in a better society.
I completely agree. Even the parents need better knowledge on how to handle.
It's a cycle thing. Unfortunately, we have too many businesses from a predator system. So there was a predator system that took over Mother Earth, especially in the United States. So when you talk about parents, of course they need stuff, but our children need to be in healthy schools. And I could define that as meditations. They need music again. They need dance again. They need play again. They need creativity again. They need nature again. They need nutrition food again. They need clean water again. They need to be able to work and communicate with each other again. We need to get rid of the computers and the cell phones. Maybe you can use the computer for an hour a day on some sort of technology. But I've listened to the mothers in my neighborhood in the last couple months and children, and they don't like these devices. They don't like being taught by a computer in school. And how could they in a cold room with lights and you're sitting there staring all day at a computer? Are we training our children to be robots? Is the question. Do we want our children to be robots that don't feel emotions, don't know how to communicate words to each other? So I think we have a revamp of education for our children. And in that education of communicating and playing together is I'm a girl and I'm a goddess, respect my body. And I'm a boy and I'm a god and I'm going to protect you. And I'm going to, so we start to teach the divinity of that instead of the sicknesses that I'm hearing about, which is on social media, because, they'll ban free speeching, but they won't ban porn. I want you to think about that idea. They're not banning these sick things that our children can be exposed to. So our children don't know about respect and courtship and how to date again. And so therefore they're having sex in ways that have nothing to do with love. And then they're having babies that have nothing to do with love. And then you have a traumatized dance that goes on and on. So it's complicated. We got a lot, but I think we got to go back to the children. That's where my love is. I love working with children. Children are, when you get into a room with children, because I've gone into schools where they're like, these are bad kids. They're not bad kids. They're not bad kids. Kids are not bad. You just don't, they just read through you. They're bad for you because you're judging them. They don't want to be judged. They want to be seen and they want to be heard, and they all have gifts. And so it's like when I worked with kids, like I'd have a 4-year-old that was like a psychological genius in vocabulary. And then I'd see him walk outside and the masks go on to mom or dad or principal or other teachers, the masks. And I know that because obviously you heard about my childhood. I know all about masks. I can see when the kids put the masks on. And you got to sometimes to protect yourself. You can't share what's valuable to you if they're going to mock you or down you or be negative towards you. You got to hide your gems, but that's where we're broken. Deep stuff, man. This is a deep dive. Breathing goddess. I think I need to take a deep breath.
I mean, it's a tough situation all around.
It is. But like I said again, if you're on this podcast listening, there's a reason. If you found this, maybe an angel sent you. Maybe the Divine Mother sent you. Maybe your grandfather sent you from the other side. It's a calling. It's an activation. There's something small you can do to first empower you, because you always got to empower yourself first before you empower something around you in your environment.
I love that. Empower you and then empower something in your environment. That's a great piece of advice. I'd love to transition a tad, but I'd love to know a little bit more about the medical meditation program.
There's many of them. So there is CPTSD. And what makes that different from, let's say, EMDR or tapping is that the student is learning medical meditations. There's 9 of them. And they consist of either breath patterns, finger mudras and different formulas, or universal sounds like sa, ta, na, ma. So those sounds, your voice becomes the healing instrument. Your breath pattern, trained right, becomes the healing instrument. Your fingers, like playing a piano, become the healing. So it becomes multidimensional. And so it teaches the student a lot about their body, their breath, their voice, while rewiring the parts of the brain that deal with the nervous system of PTSD. Then you have OCD, which is a shorter brain protocol, but it's challenging. So you would never just give that right away to somebody. You would prepare them. It's like going into a dance class. You don't just leap right away or do 3 turns. You have to learn the plie to get to the jump. OCD. Then you have ADHD, which I did this year. I hadn't worked with it a lot in my career, and it brought up the sexual abuse from my lineage. So I wasn't sexually abused in this life, but there was sexual abuse in my lineage. And so I broke out in rashes. I saw visuals. I had some shaking, and sexual abuse, in my interpretation, causes dyslexia. And you may think dyslexia is just the reverse of numbers, but I had emotional dyslexia. And I didn't realize this till my dad died. So, you know, you wonder, why do I keep attracting the same types of people and then they end up being bad people? That's the idea of this dyslexia. I think we have a very dyslexic society emotionally, to be honest with you, because we've dealt collectively with a lot of trauma. ADHD is also a little bit about that reversal, low upside downside. But my favorite brain protocol, which is a longer brain protocol, it'd be interesting to do this with kids, actually. I haven't done this. But the childhood abused psychic brain protocol. It's magical. It's much longer, but it really heals the stuff and awakens that inner child. So gifts that people have that are so suppressed, you know? And so you got it. Usually it's a PTSD brain protocol or an ADHD. But then when we get to the childhood trauma brain protocol, that's magical. It's magical. It's more like unraveling these masks and layers that you don't even know exist. It always concerns me when women go, I don't remember anything about childhood, because I thought, you don't remember anything before the age of 10? Why? We should remember our memories, you know? So memory is important. And that's a big theme in my book series, Remember Everything. Remember everything. And people will say, I don't really want to remember the pain, this and that. It's in you. It causes cancers. It causes Alzheimer's. It makes you die less, and you have that in your soul database. So it's still memory. It's going to remember. Whether you want to remember it, it's still remembering. I mean, it's like, does that make sense? The brain protocols, did I define that enough for you?
It does.
And they actually do have PubMed research, but they've not been trained and utilized much in the United States. The guy who did PubMed, he's in the psychiatric world, more on the retired end in California. And he just was one of those clinical study people. And I was lucky to take this work and then kind of advance it. But there is PubMed just with the foundation of it, which I think is fascinating, because it's like, why are mental health therapists not trained in this stuff?
No, how would you say this medical meditation program is different from like mainstream meditation?
It's dealing with releasing traumas. It's dealing with activating weaknesses in areas of your brain to advance them. So now I can sit in silence and not have thoughts. And I can get downloads or channeling and really be a clear channel. So for people who are overthinking, analyzing all the time, have headaches, I think it's an advanced intelligence. It's an advanced psychology. So it's work. It's not just sitting and chanting something for the sound, which is a beautiful thing, by the way. There's nothing wrong with those things. But that wasn't going to fix me. You got to understand, like 25 years ago, sitting still was work. I couldn't sit still because I have trauma. So it's like, I've got to either eat sugar, I've got to be a workaholic, I've got to be outside of myself, right? This is how we work the hard wiring. And it's not a quick fix. It works it's like training. If you do the training for 3 months, you're going to get somewhere. You're going to get far. And you're going to gain so much about yourself. You know, if people who study dance as an adult, you know, they're like, oh, I always wanted to study, but we couldn't afford it, or we didn't have time. And then they take an adult dance class and they learn the discipline of the structure. And that's the same thing with the brain protocols. It's a little bit more of a martial arts. You're going to have to, you know, you're going to have a notebook and you're going to use a pen. You're not going to type in. You're going to use a pen to work on, okay, she said, I'm not breathing correctly on here, and this is what I need to do. And now I'm going to do it. And it empowers you. Whereas just the universal yogi meditations you do at the end, they have different effects. So obviously on your system, your glandular system, and that's a beautiful thing. It can make you feel better and calm that night. But we can't, what happens when a stress comes and you already have brain damage? That's where that's at.
Thank you so much, Heather. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me on. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. Have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yes.
So he's got a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends his podcast with 2 segments, and I've incorporated those 2 segments into mine. First segment is the many sides to us, and there's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each. They're easy questions. They're easy questions.
I'm like, oh no.
What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Loving.
What is 1 word someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Resilient.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Goddess.
What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
Stubborn.
What is 1 word you're trying to embody right now?
Receiving.
Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in up to a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
The greatest gift I can give myself is healing myself. And that's from the Divine Mother.
Why is that the best advice?
Because it sets the intention of caring about myself and going within instead of worrying about what others think.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
What is the worst advice? That you need to go along to get along?
Why is that the worst?
Because it diminishes my soul and weakens my immune system by just trying to get along in the workplace, an unhealthy workplace.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
I used to value being involved with lots of groups of people, but now I really value being with myself.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
That Heather Ann Ferri chose to be born with her parents to heal the generational bloodline traumas and to gain financial wealth and power to create a new timeline for her bloodline.
That's beautiful. If you could create 1 law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
If I could create 1 law, I would say that if you sexually abuse a child, that you go to jail for life. And in that jail, you have to do specific work.
Why would that be the law?
I think when you sexually abuse a child, that leaves a lifetime, if lifetimes, of trauma that is not easy to heal. I think in order to get back to a healthy, grounded society, we need serious consequences with people who think it's okay to sexually abuse children.
Thank you so much, Heather. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That ended on a deep, heavy note, but I'm going to get off and I'm going to do some breathing because I was with the breathing goddess.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad. And I do just like to give it back to the guest. Any final words of wisdom you want to share with the listeners before we close out?
I don't know if it's wisdom. I just want to thank them for listening to us. And if something has hit their heart and soul, to take action with that. And I wish you, Amanda, many blessings, and those that listen to us on this channel, many blessings.
Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate it. And I will link all of Heather's contact information in the show notes for you guys to connect with her directly. Thank you so much again, Heather.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for tuning in to Manders Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.